Welcome, dear listeners, to a podcast that's about to transform the way you lead, the way you grow and thrive in your life and career. Get ready to embark on a journey filled with inspiration and self-discovery. This is Afsheen, the host of the Getting Real podcast. And this season, I'm delighted to be joined by none other than my co-host, Vicki Davitashvili. Vicki?
Are you ready to embrace the joy of leadership, the power of self-discovery, and the limitless potential of your career, and ultimately your entire life? Join us on this incredible journey of transformation.
Yep, stay tuned because the best is yet to come. Welcome back, Vicki. Here we are again on the Getting Real podcast with our weekly mini master classes that we've been doing, myself and Vicki together. So Vicki, how are you doing today? Are you looking forward to our conversation?
Oh, hi, Afsheen. I am so looking forward to our conversation today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart.
Yes, and I think we really do only touch on topics that are near and dear to our hearts, right? So we have a lot of interesting weeks and a lot of interesting topics to cover over the following weeks. And today's topic on the subject of topics is trust. So very near and dear to my heart as well, and something that I think is really, truly the foundation of so much that happens in organizations from a performance, results, outcomes perspective. I think everything sits on a very strong foundation of trust, and that without that, I know organizations, teams, and even individuals find themselves truly at a back step. And so what I'd love to do today is work through together wrestle with this topic of what's important about trust. What do we know about trust? How does it drive business results? We're going to touch on some data and some facts, as we often do. We're going to touch on some tools as well. I have a really cool and really approachable equation for trust that I'm looking forward to sharing, and we'll unpack this topic together and see where it takes us today. So, are you ready, Vicki?
I am. I'm looking forward to it.
96% of engaged employees, according to the Gallup research, trust their management, compared to 46% of disengaged employees. So it's really a true enabler in that trust drives engagement. And engagement, and you and I have discussed this before, drives discretionary effort. And it's in that discretionary effort that not just results happen, but like exponential results happen. I'm going to stop. What are you thinking as I ruminate on this topic with you?
I think that you're spot on, and I love the data that you're bringing into the conversation. And it kind of takes me back to some experiences I've had in my life, both as a leader, but also as an employee. And I've certainly been in circumstances where I didn't trust the management. And you're absolutely right. Looking back 15 years ago in my career, I was less engaged when I didn't feel that connection and the trust in my leadership. And it especially was as a result of transparency. And I think that transparency plays a huge part in our ability to build trust or to break trust with our employees. And so I've been on both sides of the pond, right? And I've experienced both. And I know that if, for example, there were actions that were being taken in the organization, which happens inevitably, and everybody on the floor was talking about it, but yet it was the big elephant in the room that nobody would acknowledge was even out there, that right there immediately would kill my trust in my senior leadership to treat us as adults and to be transparent with us. It wouldn't be about, hey, layoffs are coming on such and such date at such and such time, and this is the person who's getting laid off. But the acknowledgement of, hey, I know that that rumor is out there. I can't speak to it, but I want to recognize that it's out there and that it might be causing you some discomfort. Even just that level of transparency helps build trust. That level of EQ and, recognition builds trust. I can tell you as a leader, I've also had circumstances where I've had, this one example comes to mind where I was managing a very talented young woman, but she had some gaps in her fundamental knowledge of the function that she was in. And she really wanted to get to the next level, the director level. And we talked about how, and, I was very open and honest with her about, the difficulty with which we are faced as managers to promote our employees. And I was actually very transparent with her in terms of what it would take in order for me to be able to promote her. And then she brought me her resume and she said, Vicki, tell me what my gaps are. I want to become a director. Tell me what my gaps are. So we looked, I gave her exactly the gaps. And then she said, well, then I feel like it's going to take me another 5 years to get promoted here. I said, I don't know about 5, but I do think that you have a little runway to go. And then she said, well, then I think it's going to be faster. It'll be easier for me to get promoted if I were to go to another company. And I was like, wow, that just took a lot of courage for her to be that open with me. And instead of me feeling frustrated with that, I actually breathed it in and I embraced it. And I said, you know what? I think you're right. I think you could get that next level role outside the company faster. And my job is to not worry about, holding on to you and hoarding you, on my team and in the organization. My job as a good leader is to care for you as your whole self. And I said, so let's look at your resume and let's see how we make you marketable even outside of this company. And that's exactly what we did. We looked at what projects can I give her to make her more marketable. We looked at what skills she needed to make her more marketable. And we looked at what was the path to promotion, both internally and externally. And I cared for her as her whole self and not just as the self that was on my team that was doing, and she was a top performer on my team. So, these are the moments in which you're tested as a leader, and these are the moments in which you create the do or die loyalty. On your team. And when you have that loyalty, because you have been trustworthy, you create magic together. This is when your team members will go above and beyond for you, more so than for the company, because people don't leave jobs, they leave managers.
Yes, amen to that. You are absolutely right. Speaking of people leaving their managers, you and I spoke about this, and I know we're going to dive into this in detail at another masterclass. But yes, people do leave their managers. And in fact, the Gallup's Q12, which is 12 key questions that drive engagement, about 9 of them are directly linked to your relationship with your manager, or what it is that your manager is able to do in order to keep you engaged. And so clearly engagement is driven by how connected you feel to your manager. And people do leave managers. They don't leave their jobs. It's absolutely true. Speaking of, I loved what you shared about it needs to be that I have enough of a transparent and honest relationship with myself and my team member in order for us to have an effective foundation in which we are creating value for each other and thereby for the team, the organization, so on and so forth. I love that you said that. I love that you pointed out transparency, because there's this equation of trust. And for the listeners, this is one of those equations. This is one of those codes, if I have to call it like that. This is one of those codes that I think, pegged my hat on or hung my hat on for so many seasons as a leadership coach and as a person who develops leaders, because it is evergreen. And so the trust equation is actually credibility plus reliability plus intimacy. Yeah. So divided by self-orientation. So trust is driven by the top three factors: credibility, reliability, and intimacy. And I'm going to define those in just a minute. And it is undermined by self-orientation. So what do I mean by credibility? And by credibility, what I mean is, does the person that I'm speaking to know what they're talking about? We trust people who are lawyers or doctors because they have simply a degree on the wall. So that is one trust factor, trust amplifying factor. Are they a trained professional? You know, I'm going to take a little bit of a segue here, but coaching is a profession that really, really suffers oftentimes because it's a non-regulated profession. It does not require you to have a certain certification and a certain level of education in order for you to begin calling yourself a coach. So that really impacts not just the coaching profession, but also coaches in general, because there are many coaches out there who don't have the level of credibility that is required for them to hold really important subjects that impact human beings effectively. So credibility, that's a massive driver of trust. The second driver of trust, as I said, is reliability, which basically means, can you be relied on to keep the promises that you make? You know, if you said, I'm going to ensure that I'm going to have a conversation with such and such in order to get some roadblocks out of your way in order to help you achieve your results, can you be relied on to actually do that? And then finally, it's that intimacy. And I think that goes back to what the example that you were sharing is, can I trust someone when they tell me something and when I tell them something that is private and personal, and you know, they won't undermine my faith in them. You know, they won't take advantage of that, and they won't go and tell somebody else about it. So those three aspects are a significant driver of trust. However, all of that would be for naught if you are highly self-oriented. So if a person perceives you as someone who's in it just for themselves, regardless of how much credibility, reliability, or intimacy you try to build, it would all be undermined by a self-oriented mentality. So how much of yourself as a leader is driven by how much it serves you? And if you are perceived as a leader who is in service of self rather than in service of others, in service of the greater good, which we talk about so often on this podcast together, Vicki, then you will really undermine the level of trust that you will gain from your one-on-one conversations and also your conversations from your team. So I stop here because I really rambled on a lot, but just again, curious what's coming up for you as I share that model or that equation.
So I love the fact that you brought this equation in because, you know, I wasn't familiar with it. But as you spoke, I was like, yes, yes, and yes. So number one, I think that this is an equation that truly resonates, at least with me personally. But the piece that jumps out at me more than anything is the self-orientation, because you're absolutely right. If you are self-oriented, if you're perceived as self-oriented, I think it absolutely does undermine everything else that you may have going for you in the numerator part, right, of the equation. And so that rings extremely true to me, and it really resonated with me. And I can genuinely tell you that I have had quite a few leaders where they said, oh, so and so is out for so and so, meaning like they're only out, like John, let's pretend. I've never had a boss named John, but John is only out for John. John only looks out for John, right? And you're absolutely right. There is very little, I'm going to go back to the word, not even trust, but loyalty. Because loyalty is a currency that is only based on trust. And I've found that loyalty, and you build loyalty in the organization through trust. I think that's one of big core elements. And, you know, I've had a boss who I knew for 15 years, and I had such loyalty towards him, I can't even begin to tell you. And the reason I had loyalty for him is because I knew a couple of things. One, I knew that he was politically savvy and he knew how to navigate the organization. Two, so that was really helpful for me, especially as I was a junior employee, because he would help me understand how things were playing out in the organization and the why behind it. So that was really interesting. Like that was one of the reasons I really trusted him and had that loyalty towards him. Two, he was always very transparent with me, and he would share with me as much as he possibly could without crossing over, you know, the ethical line. So can't give you, like, you know, the conversation would be, can't give you the details, but let me at least acknowledge that this is happening, right? So that built loyalty. Three, when we would have conversations, they would sometimes be difficult conversations. So he would give me very pointed feedback. And it wasn't always, you know, rosy. Oh, you did amazing. It was like the 2x2 framework. This is what you did well. This is where I think you could do better. This is what I think you could do next time, right? Again, it's not about always pandering to the person, but it's also having the courage to be honest with the individual and shine a light on how and where they can improve. And I never really felt like the only person that he was out to protect was himself. I also felt like he was, because of his ability to navigate the organization, he was out to protect the team as well as he could, you know? And so I've always appreciated leaders like that. And so, you know, not only being out for yourself, but also being in that service of others, I do think goes a very long way. So I don't know if anything comes up for you, but those are just some like real life examples.
I loved your example because yes, something really interesting did come up for me. Another little bit of nugget of data came up for me. You know, the Society for Human Resources Management did this research in which they discovered that employees that feel trust in their workplace and have feelings of trust they're 23% more likely. So that's significant. 23% more likely to offer solutions and ideas. And so we go back to what we often touch on, which is how innovation hungry organizations are nowadays, right? How important it is for them to foster creativity and innovation in their organizations in order for them to be able to create new products, new services, etc., etc. So imagine if you were creating these strong relationships of trust, and then as a result of that, creating a strong culture of trust in your organization. And if you were able to harness that and your leaders were able to harness that, and then that becomes the culture in your organization, and you are able to thereby have 23% more creativity and more ideas and more problem solved than your competitor because they haven't harnessed that. Imagine the impact that can have on your bottom line. And especially if it is one of your top 3 priorities to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's sort of what came up for me as you were sharing that example was, I'm sure if we could replicate your manager like 10 times, and we're able to then create almost a trust movement within the organization, what if we as leaders were taking the baton and asserting that we wanted to create organizations of radical trust and nothing else, right? What if that was the one thing, one cultural shift we were going to put our stake in the ground for and say, if we do anything well, this is what we're going to do well. We are going to drive trust and radical trust. You know, that word gets used and thrown around so often that it's never been used in line with trust. We are going to drive cultures of radical trust in our organization. Let's see what happens to the business results after that. Supposing we were able to instill and embed this culture of radical trust within our organizations, and as a result of that, we were able to progress up Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. According to that model, we'd then be able to do the next bit better, which is having more effective conflict or difficult conversations because we trust each other. So I know that when I disagree with you or if I challenge you, that I'm not doing it to you or at you, but rather for the greater good. And then if we're able to have these effective, challenging, and, you know, healthy conflict conversations, then that takes us further up that pyramid to higher levels of commitment. Because not only have I been challenged in an environment of trust and care, but I've also been able to think through the solutions that I suggested, offered, stood up for, and assimilated more feedback from through these effective, challenging conversations. And so that amplifies my commitment, which then takes me up the next level of Lencioni's pyramid, which is around accountability. Now that we've argued with one another because we have deep levels of trust, we've effectively conflicted together, we've effectively challenged each other together, we've therefore come up with better ideas and solutions that we're both equally committed to, and thereby we can now hold each other accountable, right? Because we stood up for this. We stood up for this together. And as a result of that higher level of accountability that we've created, now we're able to achieve those collective results more effectively and faster and with more creativity. So that's sort of what's coming up for me, is if we are able to create cultures of radical trust within our organizations, we can then, I imagine, elevate everything that comes up after that in order for us as organization leaders to steer the organization towards its organization priorities more effectively, and also from places of deeper engagement.
I really love you giving us a framework for how you move up the pyramid and how you get to a point of accountability and really acting together in, for the greater good. But there were a couple of things that were coming up for me as you were talking. So we're watching the issue or the topic of trust play out in the real world right now. If you look at what's happening at OpenAI. Now, the reason the board pushed Sam Altman out is because they felt like they couldn't trust his communication and they pushed him out. Interestingly enough, he had built up enough loyalty and personal equity with the rest of the employees, where 500 of them, now imagine about, you were talking about, creativity, innovation, interesting ideas. 500 of those brilliant minds want to exit the company because the board won't reinstate him. And so we're watching trust play out on both sides of the equation because of mistrust and because of the trust and the loyalty that the people have in their leader. And I just think that this is an incredible example of what trust means on both sides of the equation, right? As you go up in the organization, or when you are able to build that like loyalty and trust with your employees to really lead you to where you want to take this company, this vision, this idea. And as we think about all of these budding entrepreneurs that are also coming up and building out new companies and building out all of these, incredible new innovations in the marketplace, well, you as an entrepreneur need to build trust with the people that are investing in your company. And at the same time, you have to have the trust of the people to follow you into battle almost, right? To go and to take that risk with you and to follow that vision that you set in place. So I think that in entrepreneurship, being able to be a trustworthy leader becomes even more critical in your ability to live or die as an entrepreneur, as an entity. Same thing goes for any large organization, right? CEOs, what do, especially at publicly traded companies? They go on a roadshow. They meet their big investors. They meet their big clients. They build relationships. We're still in a human economy, and trust is part of that human economy. And we can't make anything happen without the human economy. And trust is a foundational element in all of that. So that was what was coming up for me as you were talking, and you were kind of like, I was picturing the pyramid in my head. So I just really wanted to shine a light on that. And I think that it's really important for us to see how trust is playing out in the real world, and it's having do or die consequences for OpenAI, which was the fastest startup to take hold and to just like completely revolutionize the way that we work in the past 6 to 12 months. Like not just the way that we work, just the way that we operate, the way that we function. Nothing gets done without ChatGPT anymore. So
that is like, I love that has come up as really the most current example, and it's playing out literally in front of our eyes right now. And what a great one to pull out of the hat. You're all yearning for those safe places, right? In a world that is replete, let's say, with conflict and disagreements and misunderstandings, and we are all yearning for a place of safety, security, and trust. Why it's so hard to achieve it, I suppose. Why is it so hard for us to achieve trust?
I have the answer for you.
You do.
At least I have the answer that's coming to me very intuitively, and it's very strong. And the answer is fear. I think it is because, so many of us are conditioned from childhood onwards to operate from fear. And fear is behind so much of our behavior. Fear, when you feel that you need to be the best, that means if you're the winner, then somebody else is the loser. That's fear. Because then you don't believe that everybody could be just as good. That, when you don't operate from a place of love, but you operate from a place of fear, that's when you're only looking out for number one. When you're looking out for number one, no one will trust you because they know that that's how you're operating. When you don't have the courage, and when you're still in fear of being authentic and transparent and vulnerable, you're still in fear. So fear is what holds us back from being able to operate in a way that builds trust with others, because you're not in an open-hearted place. You're in a very closed-hearted space. Yeah. You're not transparent because you fear that if you will be open and transparent, that there will be repercussions. Whereas you can be transparent and be responsible at the same time. When you are operating in service of I and instead of service of we, you're still in fear. And so when you're not a servant leader, but you're a leader of just myself, you're in fear because you don't believe that you can let others shine, because if they shine, then it's at the expense of you. But it's not. It's actually an and. It's a 1 + 1 = 11 equation. But when you're in fear, you see it as a 1 - 1, and therefore it's a 0, right? And so I think so much of whether we observe what happens externally in the world around us, the conflicts that we see, I think that's fear driven. I think that when you are unable to operate from an open-heartedness, that's fear. So I know I keep repeating this word, but honestly, my friend, I think it is when you're in a place of fear rather than a space of love. That's why I think we are unable, or some of the leaders are unable, to build that culture of trust. And yet when you do, magic happens. Magic.
Wonderful. What a great conversation we've had today, Vicki. Any final words or thoughts? I think for me, I really feel as though we've come full circle in this conversation. We've explored so many different angles of trust. And I loved all the personal experiences that you've shared as well, because I think that's a lovely balance between all the facts, the data, the equations, and then actual real life examples. So yeah, those are my final thoughts. What a great conversation we've had today.
I think my closing thought would be, have the courage to be you. Trust yourself to be you. And when you are you and you're operating from a place of love, you will just very naturally build trust. And when you build trust, all of those other outcomes, the creativity, the engagement, loyalty, all of that is going to be a natural byproduct of you being in a place of self-trust and building trust with others.
Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come.